Hey troops, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ryan and I'm a former Royal Marines Commando from the United Kingdom, and today we're going to be reacting to the real reason Putin is preparing for war in the Ukraine. I don't know too much on this situation. I've heard bits and bobs on the news. I'm not going to pretend to be, quite articulate on the whole situation because I'm not. I don't have a great in-depth understanding on the previous history that they've had, the current history, and I don't know where they're going to go from now. So we're going to find out today the real reason, allegedly, why Putin is preparing for war in the Ukraine. I think this is going to be a good one. The video is very well put together by a great channel. The channel is Johnny Harris, so make sure you go subscribe to this dude. But before we get into it, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, guys. It really does help me out. Just want to say thank you to every single one of you so far for being on the channel. And if you want to support it even further, you can become a member. We just have one membership tier system now, so press the join button. If you don't see the join button, click the link in the description. I'd really appreciate your help, guys. But let's just get into this one. I'm looking forward to it.
Russian invasion of Ukraine. Momentum is building for a war between Ukraine and Russia.
Tensions between Russia and the West are growing rapidly.
President Biden considering deploying thousands of troops to Eastern Europe.
There are now 100,000 troops on the eastern border of Ukraine. Russia is setting up field hospitals on this border. Like, this is what preparation for war looks like. A legit...
Yeah, just to put those numbers into kind of real life perspective, those numbers are greater than the United Kingdom's entire military. So it's the equivalent of the British military deploying all of its troops that it has to its disposal and putting them on a border somewhere and then asking for a few thousand off some other countries because we haven't got that amount of active soldiers. So 100,000 people, that's a lot. That's a lot. There's intent behind that.
Legitimate war.
Ukrainian troops are watching and waiting, saying they are preparing for a fight.
The U.S. has ordered the families of embassy staff to leave Ukraine. Britain has sent all of their non-essential staff home. And now the U.S. is sending tons of weapons and munitions to Ukraine's army. And we're even considering deploying our own troops to the region. I mean, this thing is heating up. Meanwhile, Russia and the West have been in Geneva and Brussels trying to talk it out and sort of getting nowhere.
The message is very clear. Should Russia take further aggressive actions against Ukraine, the costs will be severe and the consequences serious.
It scares the living shit out of me, guys. These types of wars, we've been used to fighting in the deserts of Iraq. The Iraq was a formed military organization with legitimate soldiers, but they didn't have that backbone experience to fight a conventional military such as the United Kingdom and the United States. They just didn't have that desire, and that desire is created over centuries of war fighting. All right, in the United Kingdom and the US, when we deployed there and invaded Iraq, we had that backbone experience, and it really did show. Not the case for Afghanistan. We were fighting a militia. Militias have many years of experience, but they're not formed, all right? They're not a legitimate formation of actual military individuals who are systematically the same throughout the board. They're very different in different areas, okay? So we were quite successful in those regions for that reason. This, however, would be a very powerful, legitimate military organization against another formidable military organization. And you can only begin to imagine the horrors associated with those two individuals fighting one another. We're talking effective artillery, we're talking effective airstrikes, we're talking air capabilities, we're talking boots on the ground with weapon systems who actually know very much how to use them systems to the best of their ability. We've got men who have backbones who are willing to fight to the death and continue to do that for country. These types of wars are scary as hell for any soldier, and I'm an ex-military man. Do I think we should get involved in this? No, I don't want anything to do with it. It just scares the living daylights out of me. There's only losers in this whole situation. No one truly gains anything.
A scary, grim momentum that is unpredictable, and the chances of miscalculation and escalation are growing. I want to explain what's going on here, but I want to show you that this isn't just typical geopolitical behavior, stuff that can just be explained on the map. Instead, to understand why 100,000 troops are camped out on Ukraine's eastern border, ready for war, you have to understand Russia and how it's been cut down over the ages, from a Slavic empire that dominated this whole region to then the Soviet Union, which was defeated in the 90s. And what you really have to understand here is how that history is transposed onto the brain of one man, this guy, Vladimir Putin. This is a story about regional domination and struggles between big powers, but really, it's the story about what Vladimir Putin really wants.
Russian troops moving swiftly to take control of military bases in Crimea.
Russia is amassing more than 100,000 troops and a lot of military hardware at the border with Ukraine.
Before we go any further, I want to say thank you to today's sponsor, which is BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a platform that systematized a little quiz with. For me, it started there.
Not bothered about this.
BetterHelp is not a crisis out. Where's the right
Not bothered about
in
BetterHelp.
my description? Thank you. Back in. Okay, let's get up to speed on what's happening here. And I'm just gonna quickly give you the highlight version of like the news that's happening, because I wanna get into the juicy part, which is like why, the roots of all of this.
Yeah,
so let's go. A few months ago, Russia started sending more and more troops to this border. It's this massive border between Ukraine and Russia. They said they were doing a military exercise, but the rest of the world was like, yeah, we totally believe you, Russia. This was right before this big meeting where North American and European countries were coming together to talk about a lot of different things, like these countries often do in these diplomatic summits. But soon, because of Russia's aggressive behavior coming in and setting up 100,000 troops on the border with Ukraine, the entire summit turned into a whole WTF Russia, what are you doing on the border of Ukraine meeting. Before the meeting, Putin...
The thing is, though, guys, if you look at like other countries who do similar things, you know, the United Kingdom, the United States have a presence in Estonia, for instance. We don't then come to the conclusion that we are being aggressive in nature there. But with Russia, we automatically seem to come to that conclusion. Here's a question for everyone who's watching this right now. Drop a comment below. Does the fact that Russia have 100,000 troops across the border imply that they are being aggressive? Does it actually imply that they're being aggressive? It's their border, all right? Let's think of it logically. They haven't went across that border. They say they have no intention of doing that, and it's their border. They belong there. Is that an act of aggression, or is that just them doing and exercising the rights of what they can do on their own land? I'm not going to comment on that one. I'll let you decide that, guys.
comes out and says, listen, I have some demands for the West. And everyone's like, okay, Russia, what are your demands? You know, we have like COVID-19 right now, and like that's like surging. So like, we don't need your like bluster about what your demands are. And Putin's like, no, here's my list of demands. Putin's demands for the summit were this. Number one, that NATO, which is this big military alliance between US, Canada, and Europe, stop expanding, meaning they don't let any new members in, okay? So Russia's like, no more new members to your like cool military club that I don't like. You can't have any more members. Number two, that NATO withdraw all of their troops from anywhere in Eastern Europe. Basically, Putin is saying, I can veto any military cooperation or troops going between countries that have to do with Eastern Europe, the place that used to be the Soviet Union, okay? And number three, Putin demands that America vow not to protect its allies in Eastern Europe with nuclear weapons. LOL, said all of the other countries. You're literally...
Right, so the key to that little phrase was not protect any of the Eastern European countries with nuclear weapons. It didn't say protect them holistically, excluding military nuclear weapons. If it's the nuclear weapons thing and everyone can agree on something similar, then I think that's a good thing to de-escalate any kind of potential nuclear threat. if it's a matter of we want you to not use military weapons to protect other countries, but we're still going to have that within our arsenal, then I don't agree with that. Okay, but if it's to holistically, reduce the active use of nuclear weapons and or potential active use, then I think that's potentially a good thing to de-escalate that. But it depends on the provisions of what his request is. We could go deep into that, but I don't know what to make of it.
Nuts, Vladimir Putin. Like, these are the most ridiculous demands ever. But there is Putin with these demands, these very, very aggressive demands. And he sort of is.
So he's changed it there. Putin's demands: USA won't protect East European allies. That's quite a narrow statement. I would like to know what the provisions were that. Because he said with nuclear weapons, so that's completely different. But if it's to not protect Eastern European allies, then that's a pretty big deal, and I don't agree with that. That shows potential intent to invade certain areas with the agreement that the United States won't protect its Eastern European allies, which is absolutely insane. No, America would never agree to that.
Is implying that if his demands aren't met, he's going to invade Ukraine. I mean, it doesn't work like this. This is not how international relations work. You don't just show up and say, like, I'm not going to allow other countries to join your alliance because it makes me feel uncomfortable. But what I love about this list of demands from Vladimir Putin for this summit is that it gives us a clue on what Vladimir Putin really wants, what he's after here. You read them closely and you can grasp his intentions. But to grasp those intentions, you have to understand what NATO is and what Russia and Ukraine used to be. Okay, so a while back I made this video about why Russia is so damn big, where I explain how modern-day Russia started here, in Kiev, which is actually modern-day Ukraine. In other words, modern-day Russia, as we know it, has its original roots in Ukraine. These places grew up together, and they eventually became a part of the same mega empire called the Soviet Union. They were deeply intertwined, not just in their history and their culture, but also in their economy and their politics. So it's after World War II, it's like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and NATO was formed, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This was a military alliance between all of these countries that was meant to sort of deter the Soviet Union from expanding and taking over the world. But, as we all know, the Soviet Union, which was Russia and all of these other countries, collapsed in 1991. And all of these Soviet republics, including Ukraine, became independent, meaning they were not now a part of one big block of countries anymore. But just because the borders all split up, it doesn't mean that these cultural ties actually broke. Like, for example, the Soviet leader at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, this guy, Gorbachev, he was the son of a Ukrainian mother and a Russian father. Like, he grew up with his mother singing him Ukrainian folk songs. In his mind, Ukraine and Russia were like one thing. So there was major reluctance to accept Ukraine as a separate thing from Russia. In so many ways, they are one. There was another Russian at the time who did not accept this new division.
Right, so you can see the problem straight away culturally. They're trying to separate something that you can't just culturally separate places that have existed in situ for a long, long time. We're not talking about similarities. These countries acted as one for a long time. I guess a similar problem, I say a similar lightly, a similar problem with the borders in the Ottoman Empire when those were drawn up. It was the same people in different regions doing the same stuff. And then all of a sudden they were divided because of a war and told, the left side's going to be under control via this person and the right side via that person. And culturally they're thinking, well, this just doesn't work out. We see these problems on the Kashmir border all the time now with the divisions in Pakistan and India. Effectively, if you were to put an Indian and a Pakistani on either side, you wouldn't be able to distinguish between the two from the border because culturally they live very similar lives. Granted, religious reasons and stuff, very different lives, but a lot of these people live very similar culturally. They've lived like that for a long, 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 long time, and the division with borders have caused these problems, and the split from the Ukraine and Russia and the Soviet Union collapsing seems to have just widened those problems because effectively they're the same people. That's what I'm gathering from this anyway.
This young intelligence officer, Vladimir Putin, who was starting to rise up in the ranks of post-Soviet Russia. There's this amazing quote from 2005 where Putin is giving this State of the Union address, where Putin declares the collapse of the Soviet Union, quote, the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. And as for the Russian people, it became a genuine tragedy. Tens of millions of fellow citizens and countrymen found themselves beyond the fringes of Russian territory. Do you see how he frames this? The Soviet Union were all one people in his mind. And after it collapsed, all of these people who were a part of the motherland were now outside of the fringes or the boundaries of Russian territory. First off, fact check. Greatest catastrophe of the 20th century? Do you remember what else happened in the 20th century, Vladimir?
Yeah, just a little.
Putin's worry about the collapse of this one people starts to get way worse when the West, his enemy, starts showing up to his neighborhood, to all these ex-Soviet countries that are now independent. The West starts selling their ideology of democracy and capitalism and inviting them to join their military alliance called NATO. And guess what? These countries are totally buying it. All these
It's like that situation. It's a manipulative situation where you've got an alleged bad guy and then the alleged hero comes along and swoops you up because you've been so badly treated. It's very much a situation of mass manipulation that's been going on. Hey, come here, we'll be your friend. We're the good guys, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But the intention might not be as it appears, okay? They're just acting as that manipulative person who's coming to swoop you up. It's like a bad relationship, really, isn't it? And then you get a person who comes along in this shining armor, presenting themselves to be better than the alternative, and really they're just manipulating the situation where you've been vulnerable. I think that's the key word to use here. These countries were vulnerable at the time, especially post-World War II. That's what it seems anyway. The key word for this is always vulnerability, guys. Let me know what you think, though. Am I naive in thinking that? I don't think so.
Ex-Soviet countries are now joining NATO, and some of them the EU, and Putin is hating this. He's like, not only did the Soviet Union divide and all of these people are now outside of the Russia motherland, but now they're being persuaded by the West to join their military alliance. This is terrible news. Over the years, this continues to happen while Putin himself starts to chip away at Russian institutions, making them weaker and weaker. He's silencing his rivals, and he's consolidating power in himself. And in the past few years, he's effectively silenced anyone who can challenge him. Any institution, any court, or any political rival have all been silenced. It's been decades since the Soviet Union fell, but as Putin gains more power, he still sees the region through the lens of the old Cold War, Soviet, Slavic Empire view. He sees this region as one big block that has been torn apart by outside forces. The greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. And the worst situation of all of these, according to Putin, is Ukraine, which was like the gem of the Soviet Union. There was tons of cultural heritage. Again, Russia sort of started in Ukraine. Not to mention, it was a very populous and industrious, resource-rich place. And over the years, Ukraine has been drifting west. It hasn't joined NATO yet, but more and more it's been electing pro-Western presidents. It's been flirting with membership in NATO. It's becoming less and less attached to the Russian heritage that Putin so adores. And more than half of Ukrainians say that they'd be down to join the EU. 64% of them say that they would be cool joining NATO. But Putin can't handle this. He is in total denial. Like an ex-boyfriend who can't handle his ex-girlfriend starting to date someone else, Putin can't let...
That is a fantastic way of putting it. And that's exactly how it seems. He just can't let it go. But I'm thinking, is he trying to preserve Russia as well? If in his head, if he lets the Ukraine, eventually join Europe and NATO and all of these other things? Will that be a sign of struggle within Russia? Holistically speaking, would other places want to do the same eventually if he lets this slide? In his head, is he thinking maybe other countries will form and follow the same way? He's trying to keep something that just doesn't want to gel together anymore. All right, that's a good way of putting up what he's done there. An ex-girlfriend boyfriend situation who can't move on. Sometimes the best way is just to move on, guys, because otherwise trouble will follow you. And I don't know, head of state wanting to let Ukraine just. I don't think Putin's that type of guy to just let it happen. I honestly don't. I honestly can't see him just going, yeah, crack on, do as you wish.
Let Ukraine go. He won't let go. So for the past decade, he's been trying to keep the West out and bring Ukraine back into the motherland of Russia. This usually takes the form of Putin sending secret soldiers from Russia into Ukraine to help the people in Ukraine who want to separate from Ukraine and join Russia. It also takes the form of, stealing entire parts of Ukraine for Russia.
Russian troops moving swiftly to take control of military bases in Crimea.
Like in 2014, Putin just did this.
What America is officially calling a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
He went down and just snatched this bit of Ukraine and folded it into Russia. So you're starting to see what's going on here. Putin's life's work is to salvage what he calls the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century, the division and the separation of the Soviet republics from Russia. So let's get to present day. It's 2022. Putin is at it again. And honestly, if you really want to understand the mind of Vladimir Putin and his whole view on this, you have to read this. On the History of Unity of Russians and Ukrainians by Vladimir Putin, a blog post that kind of sounds like a 9th grade history essay. In this essay, Vladimir Putin argues that Russia and Ukraine are one people. He calls them essentially the same historical and spiritual space. Kind of beautiful writing, honestly.
Yeah, but is he wrong with thinking that? Is he wrong for stating that? He's not saying it about anywhere else. He's just saying it about the Ukraine, i.e. the birthplace of modern-day Russia anywhere. Is he really wrong for saying that, guys? I'm going to side with him on this one. I don't think he is wrong for saying that. Acting on it is very different, but saying it, I don't know, guys. I'm kind of with him on this one.
Anyway, he argues that the division between the two countries is due to, quote, a deliberate effort by those forces that have always sought to undermine our unity. And that the formula they use, these outside forces, is a classic one: divide and rule. And then he launches into this super in-depth...
I'm honestly swaying towards what he's saying here. Honestly, I mean, that is kind of what goes on. I'm not going to get too deep into this one personally. I want you guys to comment below on that, though. What do you honestly think? Is divide and rule something that Western forces and media and government have used all along? I don't know. I'm going to have to say, yeah. That is kind of how we run the world right now. I mean, Great British Empire was testament of that, divide and rule. We were the kings of that, all right? We kind of revolutionized divide and rule.
Depth, like 10-page argument as to every single historical beat of Ukraine and Russia's history to make this argument that this is one people and the division is totally because of outside powers, i.e. the West. Okay, but listen, there's this moment at the end of the post that actually kind of hit me in a big way. He says this: just have a look at Austria and Germany, or the US and Canada, how they live next to each other, close in ethnic composition, culture, and in fact sharing one language. They remain sovereign states with their own interests, with their own foreign policy, but this does not prevent them from the closest integration or allied relations. They have very conditional, transparent borders, and when crossing them, citizens feel at home. They create families, study, work, do business. Incidentally, so do millions of those born in Ukraine who now live in Russia. We see them as our own close people. I mean, listen, like, I'm not in support of what Putin is doing, but like that's like a pretty solid like analogy.
I agree.
If China suddenly showed up and started like coaxing Canada into being a part of its alliance, I would be a little bit like, what's going on here? That's what Putin feels. And so
I completely understand how he feels like that and why he feels like that. He's I mean, what else do you say? You either agree or you disagree. The method in which you agree and disagree is the thing that we need to worry about, and how people disagree. But verbally speaking, on the morality of it, I kind of understand him.
kind of get what he means there. There's a deep heritage and connection between these people.
Yeah.
And he's seen that falter and dissolve, and he doesn't like it. He clearly, genuinely feels a brotherhood and this deep heritage connection with the people of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay, Putin, I get it. Your essay is compelling there at the end. You're clearly very smart and well-read. But this does not justify what you've been up to, okay? It doesn't justify sending 100,000 troops to the border, or sending cyber soldiers to sabotage the Ukrainian government, or annexing territory, fueling a conflict that has killed tens of thousands of people in eastern Ukraine. No. Okay? No matter how much affection you feel for Ukrainian heritage and its connection to Russia, this is not okay. Again, it's like the boyfriend who genuinely loves his girlfriend. They had a great relationship, but they broke up. And she's free to see whomever she wants. But Putin is not ready to let go.
Yeah, that is true. We have to accept that, all that morality aside and saying that they're one of the same people. Well, they did split up, and that's that. They are separate entities now, and it has to be respected. I see both sides of the coin here.
What the hell's wrong with you? I love you, Jessica. What the hell is wrong with you? Dude, don't fucking touch me. I love you, dude. World star!
Putin has constructed his own
oh man, you gotta love TikTok, man.
reality here. One in which Ukraine is actually being controlled by shadowy Western forces who are holding the people of Ukraine hostage. And if that he invades, it'll be a swift victory because Ukrainians will accept him with open arms, the great liberator. Like, this guy's a total romantic. He's a history buff and a romantic, and he has a hill to die on here. And it is liberating the people who've been taken from the Russian motherland. Kind of like the abusive boyfriend who's like, she actually really loves me, but it's her annoying friends who are planting all these ideas in her head. That's why she broke up with me. And it's like, no, dude, she's over you.
I don't know. That does happen sometimes. You see some girls with shitty friends influencing that situation, and then once the separation happens, it all goes bitter and sweet. Some of us have been there, haven't we? Drop a comment if you've been there, guys.
What the hell's wrong with you? I love you, Jessica.
I mean, maybe this video should be called Putin is just like your abusive ex-boyfriend.
What the hell's wrong with you? I love you, Jessica. What's wrong with you?
Okay, so where does this leave us? It's 2022. Putin is showing up to these meetings in Europe to tell them where he stands. He says, NATO, you cannot expand anymore. No new members, and you need to withdraw all your troops from Eastern Europe, my neighborhood. He knows these demands will never be accepted because they're ludicrous, but what he's doing is showing a false effort to say, well, we tried to negotiate with the West, but they didn't want to, hence giving a little bit more justification to a Russian invasion. So, will Russia invade? Is there war coming? Maybe. It's impossible to know because it's all inside of the head of this guy, but if I were to make the best argument that war is not coming tomorrow, I would look at a few things. Number one, war in Ukraine would be incredibly costly for Vladimir Putin. Russia has a far superior army to Ukraine's, but still Ukraine has a very good army that is supported by the West and would give Putin a pretty bad bloody nose in any...
I think that's the thing where I can add a little bit of meat to the bones in terms of the military side of things. From my own experience in the military, you can be as good as you want on the battlefield as a singular entity, but you can, if you're against multiple mediocre entities, who support each other, normally that case is going to be harder for you to fight. You can be the greatest on the planet. It's a bit like a street fight. You could be a UFC fighter or a boxing fighter, really good at it as well, top notch within your field. And you could be fighting, on the streets. One mediocre person, you're going to wipe them out. Two, you're going to do the business, but it's going to be harder. You start mixing 3 or 4 mediocre assailants into the mix. Even though you're a world champion within your field, you're going to struggle. And in most cases, I'd like to argue that you can be a great fighter, but if you're fighting 5 or 6 not so great fighters who are willing to defend each other, you're probably going to come out short and you're going to get beaten off those guys. It's the same situation here. Ukraine doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have to have great supporters. As long as they are prepared to support them, then they stand a very good chance of beating the assailant person, or in this case, Russia. I think that's the worrying thing, and Putin knows all too well. He's not a stupid man at all. I think he's a very, very intelligent man. He'll know that, all right? And he'll be quite reluctant to cause any kind of major trouble in that respect, because it'll be costly for him both economically, militarily, morality as well of it. The people will be downtrodden, sickened, saddened at the cost of lives. No country wants to see life diminished in such a way, all right? Especially when it's just a matter of land grabbing. What do you think, guys?
The invasion. Controlling territory in Ukraine would be very hard. Ukraine is a giant country. They would fight back, and it would be very hard to actually conquer and take over territory. Another major point here is that if Russia invades Ukraine, this gives NATO new purpose. If you remember, NATO was created because of the Cold War, because the Soviet Union was big and nuclear powered. Once the Soviet Union fell, NATO sort of has been looking for a new purpose over the past couple decades. If Russia invades Ukraine, NATO suddenly has a brand new purpose to unite and to invest in becoming more powerful than ever. Putin knows that, and it would be very bad news for him if that happened. But most importantly, perhaps the easiest clue for me to believe that war isn't coming tomorrow is the Russian propaganda machine is not preparing the Russian people for an invasion. In 2014, when Russia was about to invade and take over Crimea, this part of Ukraine, there was a barrage of state propaganda that prepared the Russian people that this was a justified attack. So when it happened, it wasn't a surprise and it felt very normal. That isn't happening right now in Russia. At least for now. It may start happening tomorrow.
Well, maybe it's because it wasn't as effective as he is trying to imply. Okay, and maybe he's doing the same thing twice is the most obvious thing ever in the world to do, and they probably have learnt from that. Well, actually, if we do that again, maybe the other countries around us, including NATO, will understand that we are getting ready for a fight. Maybe they don't want people to know that they're getting ready for a fight. They just want to go about their business and do it. Okay, I don't think they'd do the same thing twice.
But for now, I think Putin is showing up to the border, flexing his muscles, and showing the West that he is earnest. I'm not sure that he's going to invade tomorrow, but he very well could. I mean, read the guy's blog post and you'll realize that he is a romantic about this. He is incredibly idealistic about the glory days of the Slavic empires, and he wants to get it back. So there is dangerous momentum towards war. And the way war works is even a small little fight can turn into the other guy doing something bigger and crazier, and then the other person has to respond with something a little bit bigger. That's called escalation.
Yeah.
And there's not really a ceiling to how much that momentum can spin out of control.
Well, it's a matter of the individuals who you're dealing with. It comes down to one thing and one thing only, and that is ego. Who's going to be the first to back down? Who's going to do the most extreme thing? It's all down to ego, guys. It's normally a young man's thing, this. Fueled by testosterone, driven by those hormones. But we're seeing this politically with older people. I don't know where it is. It's an egotistical thing, that's for sure.
That is why it's so scary when two nuclear countries go to war with each other, because there's kind of no ceiling. So yeah, it's dangerous. This is scary. I'm not sure what happens next here, but the best we can do is keep an eye on this. At least for now, we better understand what Putin really wants out of all of this. Thanks for watching.
That was fantastic, guys. Really, really, really enjoyed that by Johnny Harris. I'm a massive fan of his channel. I don't always agree with everything that he has to say on certain subjects, but in terms of Russia, the Ukraine, he's very well versed on this and he understands exactly what's going on. He may have his own agenda to get information across, but overall I think he's quite articulate. I think he's quite accurate on many things. He likes to delve into the past so that we can understand the current situation and how that might affect future situations. But yeah, I've actually learned quite a lot by that. So massive thanks to Johnny Harris for doing this video. Go check his channel out if you haven't already. He's at 2.9 million subscribers, so he's doing extremely well. And without people like him doing fantastic videos, we wouldn't have this opportunity to react and to also say our piece on it as well, because that's what these reactions are all about. It's not just me sat there watching a video, all right, so I can get free views. I generally want to learn and I want to put my spin and my opinion on it. And yeah, that's what I like to do, guys. If you like this video a little bit longer than normal, please smash that like button. Let me know if you watched all the way to the end. Drop your name below and subscribe to the channel, troops. It really does help me out. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.